Good afternoon and welcome to the initial meeting of the Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council Community Corrections Code Revision Work Group. Our group is tasked with studying the community corrections statutes in Indiana. My name is Chris Goff, and I serve as an Associate Justice on the Indiana Supreme Court. And I've been designated by Chief Justice Loretta Rush to serve as the chair of JRAC. And I'm also going to serve as chair of our work group. We're here today because House Bill 1068, the Local Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council statute, was signed into law by Governor Eric Holcomb on April 8th, 2021. Most provisions of the bill are effective July 1st, 2021. In one provision in particular, that caused us to convene this work group is included in section 6. It states as follows: review of community corrections code provisions. And this section was effective upon passage. The Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council, established by Indiana Code 3338 9.52, shall conduct a review of community corrections code provisions in the Indiana Code and make recommendations to improve operations with evidence-based practices. The Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council shall submit a final report containing its findings to the Department of Corrections not later than December 1st, 2021. The report to the Department of Corrections must be in an electronic format under Indiana Code 5.14.6c. So getting right to the point, we are limited in our time today to just about an hour. I wanted to open up some discussion with members of the work group as to how to go about our business. Included in the agenda was a list of those statutes that myself and staff members at the Indiana Office of Court Services determined needed to be reviewed. And those are included in Indiana Code 1112. Including chapters 1, 2, 3, 3.7, 5, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And thank you, April, for sharing the screen. The complete listing of the code provisions, which we believe need to be the subject of our review, are listed in your agenda. And I would also call your attention to item 3B, which includes certain provisions of the Indiana Administrative Code dealing with community corrections. And that may well be beyond the scope of the statutory requirements for our review, but it was pointed out by members of the task force that it may be important for us to take a look at those provisions in the Indiana Administrative Code because importantly, they contain some fee provisions. And so candidly, I want to open this up for discussion. And I wanted to just sort of start by saying, you know, I've been in this business for about 20 years, and this is the first time I've taken a look at all of these statutes at the same time and really thought or tried to give thought to what comprehensive changes might need to be made. And one thing that struck me was there's a lot of requirements for reporting. There's a lot of requirements for data gathering. Our Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council, as part of the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, has, like so many other JRACs across the country, struggled with the ability to gather good data and agree on how best to use that data as we work towards improvement in our criminal justice system. So I just suggest that the new JRAC statute also has a reporting requirement in it. From my standpoint, this might be a good opportunity for us to think comprehensively as a collective group what data points might be most important for our criminal justice systems as a whole to collect and to discuss. And with that, I really want to open this up for discussion. The statutes included on the agenda are, as I said, areas which were proposed for review during the study. And as a way to begin this review process, I would welcome recommendations on how to move forward, such as reviewing the statutes in numerical order, or perhaps we would want to organize the statutes by areas of topics such as funding, programming, administration, collaboration, definitions, etc. And at this time, I would just say, please feel free to share your thoughts regarding priorities and review organization for the work group. Because we are live streaming, and we're doing that so that we can make the work of the group available to members of the public, I would just ask that you identify yourself and the organization with which you're affiliated. Please.
I can go. I'm Kristen Bonschbach with the Indiana Department of Corrections. I'm the Community Corrections Director. Provide a little bit of background and in the request for the Code Committee review. A lot of this started with our participation and conversations generated from Indiana's evidence-based decision-making team. So it's certainly not anything new in terms of the discussions. Community corrections has been around since the 80s. And since its introduction, there's definitely been a lot of changes into what community corrections is and what kind of constitutes a community corrections. And with that, with changes, not only kind of functionally or structurally at a local level, there's also been some code changes as well. And throughout time, a lot of times there hasn't been like an analysis of, especially with House Bill 1006 in 2015, when those major changes came, to make sure that every part of statute matched any current updates and to keep up with the current times. And so we'll find in some places that there's mentions of evidence-based practice. In other sections, there's still those standard definitions of the components. We in particular don't have any kind of preconceived notion of how this should go. I think initially we definitely wanted to be conversational and continue those conversations. We had already started with the state team. And really my goal and what I asked the kind of the committee's goal is to really highlight the purpose and remove any of the ambiguity or any of the legal issues that have come up. So there's been some Supreme Court cases. Directors have brought some examples of some challenges that they've been facing locally to help those agencies out to serve the populations to the best of their ability, because it is important, it is needed, and I'm not sure if that's first kind of going through a gap analysis or taking a look at all the issues, compiling all the evidence. We certainly have all of our documents on hand of things that have been reported to us, and then seeing what needs to be changed from the code from that perspective, or if we need to have a conversation of what's working, what's not working, is it structure, is it this, and once we have that narrowed out, making the determination, is it necessary to do a legislative proposal, is it necessary to do another committee, another review, those kinds of things. It's kind of hard, at least for me conceptually, to kind of think like, here's what's wrong in this code and here's what's wrong with this code without kind of that conversation and that background. We also know that it could easily snowball into a bigger picture or a bigger vision kind of thing. We don't have a lot of time. So it's definitely really important to me and I'm sure to the directors, I'm sure the IACAC members can speak to that, to make sure that we really focus on those immediate fixes to help those directors that have been kind of facing their local challenges.
Kristen, can I ask you a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
This is Bernice Corley, Executive Director of the Indiana Public Defender Council. I think as we're organizing this work, or what I think would be a helpful tool, and thanks for whoever put the agenda together, it's really helpful. But looking at like 3A, for example, from my memory, so correct me if I'm wrong, does every county have a community corrections board? I don't think they do, but they don't. Okay. Could we be provided, or this committee be provided, like just are there links overall about where there are boards, like a map or something, so we know that where there are gaps, regions that aren't covered? that sort of thing. I think that would be a tool that would be helpful for me.
Yeah, on our website, and I can make sure that the committee gets it and send it out afterwards. We have all of the community corrections agencies. There's 77, and I believe 7 regionals. There's only 3 counties that do not have an established community corrections, which would require a county ordinance and receiving in part some of our funding. And it's just Franklin, Benton, and Newton. And actually, a couple of those counties have reached out for interest as well. And then it kind of just depends on how you would interpret county participation with the regionals. Technically, they're all part of it. So it's covering 89 of the 92 counties. But yeah, we can provide that information to you. In addition, we have all of the grantees that we serve on maps as well. That's another kind of place of conversation to discuss, is oftentimes it's the funding kind of portion is mixed in with the establishment and the structure and what's happening with community corrections. And they're not necessarily the same. They definitely will cross paths at some point, but primarily I'm looking at the issues and the struggles, with the community corrections agencies and their structure and the Supreme Court cases that have resulted.
Okay, that would be really helpful. Thank you, Kristen. And then another tool that would be helpful resource to have is I don't know if the maps will, because I think there's some flexibility in how the locals can structure their community corrections program. So I'm interested to know, or it might be helpful for this group to know, are they all, so another question, I will show my ignorance, are they all governmentally run, or are any of them privately run? Will we have that info in a map, so to speak?
So I'm only aware of one privately owned one. I mean, from the community corrections statute definition, or at least one of them, it's about that funding in part and establishing the county ordinance of working with us. So I believe there's a Michiana one that is privatized, but we don't work with them at all. And then there's Volunteers of America, which don't really kind of fall under the community corrections, but they do provide community-based supervision as well. And I'm sure there's a couple others that I'm not quite thinking of. But from our standpoint and from the code standpoint, they would have to be established and then receiving in part funding from us.
Thank you.
Kristen, I want to kind of recap what I heard you say, and I appreciate Bernice's questions because at least in my mind, they clarified some of what you were saying. When I was going over the statutes with our staff at IOCS, it occurred to me that it would be nice to simplify the code provisions, particularly now as we're expanding our JRACs to the counties. And so you indicated you thought it was important to highlight the purpose of our community corrections statutes and to remove ambiguity. And you also thought it was important that there be some mechanism by which we could do a gap analysis, a service, I take it, gap analysis. And I kind of thought Bernice's questions hit those points nicely when she was asking about variations in local models where gaps in participation were at all. And I think that those questions and your concerns really kind of hit to the purpose of why we're here in the local JRAC statutes that are coming up. So I think that those are excellent suggestions, and also appreciate Bernice's clarifying questions. Kristen, as you're here from the Department of Corrections, I know Chris Blessinger is here as well. Is there anything else, preliminarily from the Department of Corrections standpoint that you'd like us to consider as we're framing our discussion in the coming months?
Well, I definitely think we're going to need to probably narrow down the scope a little bit. I mean, as Kristen said, we don't have a lot of time to come up with some recommendations. So I guess my question to the group is, is this something where we just determine some topics and the statutes that we want to look at for maybe subcommittees and then have subcommittees look at some of these? Or is this something that every meeting will just discuss a different topic?
Yeah. What we wanted to do at this first meeting in an hour is really kind of lay out some logistical frameworks. The primary charge of our group is to complete a report, and we've got a timeline of December 1st. I can tell you my preliminary thoughts were kind of in line with, I think, what Kristen said, is that we've done some significant work with the jail overcrowding task force, for instance. We've done some significant work in the area of pretrial reform. And my thoughts to our staff was that to the extent we can keep this report concise, I think it might actually be a situation where less is more. So I don't know, at least from my standpoint, I really liked the idea of clarifying and highlighting the purpose of these statutes, and then removing ambiguity. But with that said, one of the things I think is very important to note is I want to make sure that we hear from all the stakeholder groups that we're on the same page going forward, right? This is an area where we're really trying as a state to be collaborative and hear from all stakeholder groups so that we can make sure to the extent possible, not only that everyone's heard, but that we're able to give good guidance to our communities who are going to be charged with the responsibility of supervising folks that used to be supervised in state facilities. So to the extent that we can agree on sort of a broad framework, that would be helpful to me, Chris. But I agree with you. We don't want this to snowball. And we would really like to get in a situation we have a usable product that we can say, the entire group is on board with. So with that in mind, if there's an objection to that process, I'd love to hear from it. If there's not, I'd really love to hear from all our stakeholders as to anything that, this is a big problem I see. This is something I'd like us to review these statutes with this issue in mind, or this is something we think is going really great. How can we do more of that? And, if I'm going to go first, I would say I'd like us to simplify it too. And I would like us to find more of a streamlined mechanism by which we can gather data.
This is Therese Brown, Allen County Commissioner. Thank you for the opportunity to serve on this committee. Community corrections has been in Allen County a very vital process and opportunity for a lot of the individuals that have graduated and moved on to being productive citizens. And we feel that this has been a very good collaborative effort between the DOC, the state of Indiana, the legislature, and our local community. I think to your point, sir, that clarity and removal of ambiguity is critical so that everybody is playing off the same song sheet. Ultimately, anything that's going to progress it forward to make it streamlined so that we all know what lane we're supposed to be in to be able to meet not only the statutory objective, but to be the best we can possibly be. So I guess I would be one to have a greater, broader understanding and overview that helps make sure everybody understands each component. And then if we do end up in subcommittees, we know what the charge would be so that we can clearly go down that particular silo to get those subject matters in the right framework or right reference point. So again, everyone's going down the same path.
Wow, Commissioner Brown, thank you so much for that. I'm so glad that you're taking part in this. And, as I think about these issues, I really have someone in your role in mind that we're asking, different members of our community collaborate and support what might be a different way of doing things. And so I'm so glad that you're participating. And I agree with you. That I think is critically important that we educate our stakeholders in what we're trying to accomplish and what each of the various stakeholders brings to the equation and how your role is so critically important. So thank you. You've got wonderful facilities up there too. Judge Phelps hosted a multidisciplinary team from Wabash when I was still on the trial bench up there. So thank you for what you do in Allen County.
Well, we have an awesome director as well. So shout out to Kim Churchford.
Thank you, ma'am. So who's next? I know we've got some folks that are really experts in this in the field of community corrections and probation. got some mental health folks on the call. Want to make sure we hear from everybody.
So this is Chris Cunningham from Grant County.
Hey, Chris.
So I've been doing this. We've had community corrections in Grant County since 1985. And contrary to popular belief, I was not the director when it started in 1985. But I have been around a long time with community corrections. And I appreciate this body coming together to look at this. I've had an opportunity to discuss with many of my fellow directors about community corrections and what we do. And we appreciate, since we live in the code, that you've allowed us to participate in having a say-so in the code. So that's appreciated. One of the things I guess I would like to say overarching with this is that we concentrate on the how of what we do in community corrections and not the what. And by that, I mean the utilization of evidence-based practices and the principles of effective intervention. Because as you look at funding things, you sort of look at funding things in categories. And I know that I think that's sometimes difficult for the department to determine funding because a residential work release can look much different from county to county. A home detention program can look much different from county to county. It's how you do the process with the utilization of the principles. So I think if we define that how part of it, then it might be easier to look at what it is. We have this huge listing of programs, but a lot of systems are engaged in evidence-based practices. And so I think that's a good segue to what we do. If we look at what's for the local advisory council and what's been done with that, it's focus on evidence-based practices, and the utilization of that and justification with data are all good things to focus on. I guess some of the concerns that I heard from Kristen that I'm worried about is that many of the things sometimes we're talking about tweaking affect local politics. And so sometimes if agencies or counties don't have a good partnership or collaboration with their stakeholders, sometimes trying to go in and try and fix that from a state level doesn't really fix the problem. So I just appreciate being a part of the process, and thanks.
Chris Cunningham has forgotten more about community corrections than I ever knew. And so I'm really glad that you're part of this conversation, Chris. I know when I was on the trial bench at County Away, we really looked to your practices when we were developing ours, and appreciate what you do to make our system better. And one of the things I heard you say that I think is important to keep in mind as we're determining how best to go forward is it's important to look at the how and not the what. And one of the things that struck me as I was reviewing the statutes is there's a list of things that have to be kind of checked off when you get a program done. And I remember sitting on advisory board meetings thinking that we spent more time going over that checklist than we did talking about people and about issues, how to really improve the program better. And it was kind of like, my kids, I'll go to public schools. I love public schools, but when they're getting ready for those standardized tests, sometimes you're worried about there's more time getting ready for the standardized test than there was to get ready for the, to learn about stuff. And part of it is of necessity, right? But one of the things I guess I have in mind with the creation of the local JRACs, and I think Grant County was the first one to designate its Community Corrections Board as its local JRAC board, is maybe we're going to be able to have a situation where we're talking about the same thing at the state level as we are in our communities at the same time. And if we can figure out a way to identify problems that come up that have some degree of commonality in our communities, we can figure out how best to approach them in a way that is somewhat uniform, but still allows for local deviation because our counties are different. And to me, that may be saying a lot, it may be ambitious, but I think that that's where we're going to end up going. And I think that that's what the DOC understands. We're going forward and doing this. They're a statewide organization. They do things that nobody else does. So there has to be some uniformity, but they recognize and we're committed to allowing for local deviation because that's just the way it is. That's the way Indiana works. But I appreciate that, Chris. I think that's very good input. Who wants to go next?
Justice Goff will go. This is Kirsten Haney, Assistant Director for Public Safety and Environmental Affairs Division at State Budget Agency. I just want to add in that to really kind of follow up with what Kristen had shared earlier. I know from talking with DOC, community corrections played a really foundational part during this last year during the pandemic. And so I think this is great what we're doing. I'd say that it's not so much of a question of should there be community corrections, but how can we enhance it and make sure they're performing to the best of their ability in each county. I know just from historic work on this that there's some counties that, you know, they really have it together. They're like the superstars of making sure that they're using evidence-based practices in every element that they have, really utilizing the grant award dollars. And I know from a state level, you know, we see counties that may have a funded work release and we find out the population report and then we further find out that they're not utilizing any evidence-based practices at all. So how are we serving that population? And so I think that's something that's foundational, that if we have the ability through these local JRECs to really make sure that they're using evidence-based practices, that's something that I know is really important for us.
Kirsten, as always, thank you so much for showing up. And you've done so much to keep us apprised of the budget situation during the pandemic. What I heard you say is it's important that as we establish these local JRACs, that we put them in a place where they're equipped to do what they need to do in terms of implementing these evidence-based practices. And for this group, I want something I'm really excited about is we are going to, I believe, have the opportunity through the Supreme Court to offer some technical assistance to our communities as they come on board and online. And very thankful to Governor Holcomb for helping us to fund that. And what I envision that looking like is, we're going to have some training for folks. New people that don't have the experience that Commissioner Brown has, that really need to be educated on kind of the fundamentals of evidence-based decision making and why we're bringing this group together, can really understand that we need their input about it's their community. We need to have their expertise, and we need them to understand what the various stakeholders in their criminal justice system do. So we're on board with that, Kirsten, but I really appreciate you bringing that to the fore. I always loved working in a small community. I said it was nice that even though we didn't have all the resources that we might like, we had the ability to sit down and talk to each other and understand our problems and really take an inventory of what resources we might have to solve those problems. And I'm really excited about this work because it affords our state the opportunity to do the same thing.
Justice Goff, this is Amber Finnegan. I'm the Director of Court Services in Jefferson County and also the IACAC President. And just to kind of piggyback on what Kristen was saying, the way I read the statutes in here is that a lot of them don't really explain what community corrections really does do in the state. So, I mean, I think when we're talking about removing ambiguity, I think what I would like to see out of this is we're really actually focusing on what community corrections does in there. And when we're talking about the accountability part, as far as implementing and providing evidence-based services, we're connected to funding. We get audited, we get site visits. We do get a lot of a lot of that accountability where I think that that should be pretty much overseen out of all community supervision components that are around the state, which doesn't necessarily have to do with here. But what I would like to see out of this is the special group that we have in IACAC. We met on Wednesday, and we were just talking about the definition, just going through, wanted to have a united front on what community corrections is in the definition of it. And these statutes just don't really say what we do. So that, I think, is a huge thing of what directors want, is we really want to reflect in these statutes what we actually do, the programs we provide, and the services that we give our local communities throughout.
Amber, thank you for being here. And what a great system you have in your county as well, and really able to appreciate some of the work that you do down there from my current role. I think that's incredibly important. And one of the things I made our staff here had looked at kind of a historical piece of the Justice Reinvestment Initiative that kind of took place nationwide, and how it fit in with Indiana's constitutional mandate for restorative justice. And, when I thought back on what happened with 1006, I knew as a trial judge that I just really needed to make sure my community was prepared to safely supervise folks that were going to be in the community that used to be in the Department of Corrections, and make sure that we had as many tools as possible to not only get them transitioned back or get them in the community, keep them in the community, but make them successful. And so I think that what you said about understanding the history, the purpose of community corrections, getting that message out is kind of a common theme here. But I really appreciate you saying that. So thank you. Thank you for your participation today.
I'll go next, if you don't mind. I'm Amy
Amy,
Carrozes. I'm the state public defender, and thanks for letting me join the group. I come to the JRAC meetings, and I really wanted to be a part of this. I think this is a really good group. I like that people are working from the inside. I'm working from the outside. So when I saw the mission for this committee to look at the statutes, to me, I wanted to look at sort of the consumer end of it. Do the statutes, is it clear how you get into these programs? Is it clear what the parameters are of the programs? I've had the same, questions that Bernice raised at the beginning, because, it is a little confusing if you're not in it, on how it works. How do you find out in a county what's available? How do clients get in? Do judges know how clients get in? What works, what doesn't work? Some things that like the funding part of it, I really hope that we get into things like that, and fees, even, clients, what our clients are paying. So thanks for letting me join.
Well, Amy, you're always welcome, but you bring up these points that I think are important, because even as a judge, I didn't understand how the forensic diversion language, for example, fit in with so much of the things that we do when we're sitting around a table deciding whether or not somebody should be accepted into problem-solving courts. And I think your point is a very valuable one, that if we could have a concise way to say, hey, criminal justice professional, whether you're a prosecutor making a charging decision, or a decision to offer a plea agreement, or a sentencing judge, or a public defender that's trying to adequately represent your client, how you can make sure that that person is afforded the best opportunity to transition back into a community safely and successfully. And so that perspective is a valuable one. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Justice Goff.
Oh yeah, Judge Spitzer, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. So I'm Judge Mark Spitzer, Grant Circuit Court. I've also got our supervisor, our drug court, our veterans treatment court, and serve as an officer on our local community corrections board. I think, guess what I would share, Justice Goff, is as I started thinking about how do I get my arms around this issue, I kind of went back to the basics. And so I started looking at the statute and the definition of community corrections program. And it talks about, in essence, it's a community-based program providing services to individuals that are involved in the justice system. And the statute also has an expectation of the use of evidence-based practices. But then it's also one that's funded by DOC. And so this is I think the challenge from a judicial perspective is that you have sort of programs that have the same, in essence, purpose. Some are funded by DOC and some are not. And so some are community corrections programs under this statute, but then you have other things like drug courts, veterans courts, prosecution diversion programs, other types of things that would fit under sort of that definition, except they're not funded by DOC. The challenge that we bumped into in Grant County as we did the EBDM program and started to look at things more of an overall view is that sometimes the standards are different from a DOC that's coming from another branch of government and from a program that's suggested by the or administered by the judicial branch of government. So what I'd like to see is some synergy in terms of expectations, methodology, standards, and things like that between, amongst all of these types of community-based programs providing service to offenders, regardless of whether they're funded by DOC or not. So I'd hope that part of this effort would be to kind of see that we're all singing from the same hymnal moving forward, regardless of who's funding the program. Now, I do think there's been some significant progress made from that standpoint. I've appreciated in statewide EBDM the conversations that we've had with DOC, and I feel like things are closer than they've ever been with regards to those. But still, I think there's probably some work that could be done there. I think there's a lot of different things that could contribute to that. But I hopefully that will be part of the conversation as we look at this. And I think the reason that's important is as we look at local JRACs, they're going to be looking at not just sort of coordinating the purposes of the DOC funded programs, but also the purposes of the others. So that if there's a global vision for the county, they're going to be looking at kind of trying to get all of those programs working towards the same general purposes. So I think we need to model that from a JRAC perspective.
Judge, usually when you open your mouth, I think what a great idea. And Judge Spitzer also serves as the chair of our pretrial reform committee. And Indiana has went through in the past few years a process whereby we're asking judges at the time a pretrial release decision is made to consider the results of an evidence-based risk assessment tool as one part of their decision. And kind of a small move maybe, but huge to implement. And part of the thinking behind this new committee was that someone in Judge Spitzer's county is really largely the reason Indiana is part of the evidence-based decision-making movement. And that's kind of Indiana specific too. We are kind of a bottom-up state, right? Things start locally and then they take part, they take root at the state level. That's our tradition of paying for public defenders. We were the first state to have our Supreme Court certify problem-solving courts, and that happened because there were a couple of pioneering judges who implemented drug courts because they saw a need. But Judge Spitzer's committee is the first committee of the Indiana Judicial Conference that consists of some non-judges. We thought it was important when we were assembling that committee to have members of the Public Defense Committee, members of the prosecuting attorneys community, I should say community public defense community, and others take part in that so that we could get really kind of a wide range of opinions as we go into communities and we look at how their practices are operating. And then what we do is we offer them an opportunity to certify their process. That's what we've done with problem-solving courts for a number of years. And as Judge Spitzer was talking, one of the things that occurred to me is perhaps that's something that we could look at in the future, is that if communities wanted to have some various professionals at the state level come in and kind of take an assessment, right? We have jail inspections, right? I was looking at these statutes and you have jail inspections every year, but if you had folks just kind of come in and holistically, like a checkup, what's going on, right? And what do you have that could use some work? And here's some resources, by the way, to shore that up. That might not only help with data collection, but it might also help to ensure that we've got a system that really meets all the constitutional requirements statewide.
Justice Goff, I would just add one thing. This is Jay Chaudhary. I'm the director of the Division of Mental Health and Addiction. Happy to be here. And I will say it struck me at first time I've ever read the Community Corrections Code. Despite being a lawyer, I don't read code for fun. And the Division
of other things on your mind, Jay.
The Division of Mental Health and Addiction is all over it, and I was just it surprised me, I guess, because I didn't necessarily realize that was the case. It makes sense. I just didn't really realize it. But I would double down on what Judge Spitzer said about synergy and sort of suggest the word alignment as something. And let me give you a very tangible example of a way a system could be like sort of transformatively aligned, and recognize that it may not be possible for a million different reasons. But so there's the whole concept of work release and Medicaid eligibility, which many of us have talked about for a long time. If somebody's on work release where they're under the sort of control and command of the court or the jail, then they're not eligible for Medicaid. Whereas if they're on a less controlling form of community corrections, then they are eligible for Medicaid. And to me, a truly aligned system would take that into account, right? From the judicial side on down, because all we're doing in that case, if you think about it, I mean, is the trade-off of control really worth foregoing this federal funding and access to all these really important services? I mean, I would argue no. I mean, I'm not an expert in, criminal justice or jurisprudence or anything, but I would say that, if the statute and the policies and procedures could be written in such a way that we were able to align the Medicaid requirements in terms of control with whatever that is, that would be something that would really change a whole lot and improve access to services in a sustainable way. So that's an example, but that's the sort of thing I'm hoping to talk about or discuss. And I'm sure there's others that other folks have thought about.
Yeah, Jay, thank you for being here. And that's why I think it's critical to have somebody in your role who understands law. At least it's helpful for our perspective. And I appreciate that. I think it's an excellent idea. I would venture to guess that many people are not aware of that when they make that decision.
Justice Goff?
Yes.
Yes, Bill Watson. I'm the Director of Court Services in Vigo County.
Great, welcome.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I've heard talked about by several of the people on the committee, and kind of goes back to what Amy addressed a while ago, one of the things that entices many communities to be involved with community corrections and through their boards is the ability to develop their programs based on what they see the priorities of their local level communities, what their needs are. That differs from community to community, as we all know. That's been the enticing thing, I know, oftentimes, but it's also the frustrating thing for other communities and other legislators and others when they say, well, they do it this way here and they do it that way here. And I see Amy's frustration with that, because what may get you into a program in one county may not get you into a program in another county. And I think that's the ambiguity that we're talking about here today and have been talking about for a period of time. But I think with the creation of the local level JRAC boards, I think that will go a long way in maybe helping clear up some of that ambiguity at the state level, but at the same time recognizing that the local communities, I think, as you spoke about yourself, develop from the bottom up a lot of times and make it to the state level. I hope that somewhere along the route we don't lose that in this process, because I think that's important to our local level service providers and our partners and stakeholders locally.
Wow, Bill, thank you. You know, it's another excellent community. I mean, Vigo County is one of those counties that is responsible for Indiana having drug courts because you had a judge early on who saw a need. And, you know, the way I've always thought about this since 1006 happened is I was a local judge interested in making sure I had resources to connect to the people that were my responsibility. But now in this role, the challenges I see it is really making sure that there is a vessel through which to adequately deliver these services to the people who need them. And, you know, we're so blessed now to have instant communication and instant information on anything, but now there's so much of it that it's hard to get anybody on the same page. So what excites me about local JRAC and this group of stakeholders that, you know, over the last few years, we've been able to develop a good working relationship is we're going to be able, I think, to have the same conversation. And it's almost like pre-cable TV where there's only 3 or 4 networks to watch, right? And so you've got everybody kind of looking at the same, as our county commissioner friend from Allen County said, reading from the same sheet of music. So I hope that that's what's going to happen. But yeah, rest assured that that was deep in our thoughts when we were talking about this issue. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We've got about 15 minutes left, and I don't want to cut anybody off or not, you know, or move on without giving everybody who wants to be heard an opportunity to be heard. This is something that Indiana, our judicial branch of government especially, I can tell you, as somebody who's served in it now for over 20 years, we really want to do things collaboratively. We want to make sure that our various stakeholders are heard from. The value of courts and legitimacy of courts really comes from people having confidence in their fairness, confidence in the process. And we can only do that if we have stakeholders who are willing to participate and let us know, you know, no punches pulled, what you're dealing with and what we need to be working on.
Justice Goff.
Hi, Mary Kay. Yes.
Hi, I'm Mary Kay Hudson. I'm the Executive Director for the Office of Court Services. And I think, you know, hearing all of the comments that people have made about the various opportunities that we have to kind of align things and build some synergy, but also thinking about like the logistics of the next meeting, how are we going to do this? My thought is I'm kind of thinking about when we did like our state level mapping and we kind of walked through our system. Would there be any way that we could kind of follow that model in the sense of, and this is kind of how my brain is wired, which is why I'm thinking of it this way, of walking through the community corrections article, for example, with several questions in mind. So when we think about when we did our state, or you all did your local mapping, it was what happens, what should happen, what does best practice say? And so, you know, based upon some of the comments that other members of this group have made about what they'd like to see, can we pose some questions in each of those different chapters, with the understanding that some of the discussion may be around very technical things, like the definition of community corrections, or is there you know, a language fix that we need to make? And you know, in the scheme of things, those are smaller in nature, and then the discussion may graduate to some of those longer term, larger scale issues, like, you know, the philosophy about community supervision and how we can better align, and then everything in between. And I know that we want to keep this manageable, but I also know that after December 1st, JRAC as a body still has opportunity to review these issues, either, you know, recommending that their charge be extended an additional year, or even just on its own continue to look at these issues. So I think there's no harm in identifying kind of as big and broad of the issues as we either want to recommend for the December 1st report, or that we identify, you know, these are really critical and important, and we're going to take our time to study these things over the course of the next year or so. So I just think a systematic review with as many people involved in the same conversation as possible. And I say that because I've never worked in community corrections. I have worked in probation. And so I know we have Popeye and we have some consolidated programs. And certainly we have community corrections that partner with probation departments. And so I don't know that I don't fully understand all of the issues that community corrections agencies are facing or that DOC is working through. And so I think our other partners may also benefit, as Amy said, or as Bernice said, about really understanding the mechanics. It's hard for me to think about how to make recommendations if I don't feel like I have a good command of the mechanics. And I think it's probably reckless of me personally to make recommendations if I don't understand something. So I just think that kind of starting at the top and understanding that this really will take off. And I think we can accept that and be prepared for that and be prepared to parking lot some things if we think they're too big for us to tackle between now and December 1st.
Mary Kay, I really appreciate your observations. I heard you say that we've been served well in the past by mapping our systems so that we have a logical starting point at which to start our discussion, manage our discussion. I heard you say that we're going to have to look at this if we were to map our statutes and community corrections regard in a way that would allow us to ask questions, meaningful questions about each section as we went through it. And then I also heard you say that if we did it the right way, it might not, December 1st might be kind of an arbitrary date to get the work done. Is that fair?
Is. I mean, clearly just a suggestion, but I think, compiling the questions or the comments or the areas that this group identified as priorities or kind of the lens in which they want to look at this moving forward, and then approaching each of the chapters through those various lenses. And I think, similar to with the jail overcrowding task force, our office staff that as well. And there were issues that were not capable of being addressed, or there were no recommendations that could be made that could be executed within a certain time frame. And I think we're probably going to face that now, where there will be areas of continued exploration beyond December 1st is my thought. And I think it's okay for this group to not have a resolution on all of those things. I think it's okay for JRAC to take those on as a body moving past that.
Thank you.
Justice Goff, this is Chris. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I think this is so great that everybody's feedback, because it's so nice to hear that everybody has the same thoughts and questions, that we have in DOC. I mean, that's why we wanted to do this. So I definitely appreciate everybody's feedback. This has been a great discussion. I think, in broad terms, if we stick to, looking at what is community corrections, looking at the placement statute, maybe work releases, and I think a few people we even talked a little bit about funding. I mean, those are some broad topics that I think we could definitely discuss and come up with some ideas for. And, as Mary Kay said, I mean, just broad scope recommendations, and then, we're always going to be able to continue to have discussions about this.
Chris, well, thank you. And what great partners IDOC has been, especially in the last year. I couldn't thank you enough for how receptive you've all been there to the needs of our justice system as we've navigated really uncharted waters. I think I heard you say that you thought some broad categories we might look at when we're carrying out our discussion would be placement, work release, and funding.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I agree. I wonder if we might add to that our treatment services. We've got Jay here, and he's talking about some perspective that I think, I'm a lawyer. Jay's a lawyer, but he's now in this this treatment leadership role. I want to make sure that we're not missing the boat on some things as we go through here. And
absolutely.
One other discussion I'd like us to keep in mind, if I might, just to exercise the prerogative of the chair, I suppose, is I want us to be the state that gets past the data issue. I want us to look at the reporting requirements within this statutory scheme are really, really thick. You know, Chris had talked about earlier how we do something, not what we do. And I think that that's really important, that maybe if we can kind of look at what data points are really critical to be collecting and, you know, discuss, and I mean, that's going to drive our funding decisions going forward. That's going to drive so much going forward, but, and that's going to be pretty ambitious, but maybe if we're looking at those issues broadly, we might have a logical starting point.
I know we just have a couple minutes, sorry. A couple minutes. I just wanted to highlight, I really liked Mary Kay's idea, where I know, as Chris mentioned, like we all kind of have some laundry list ideas, and I'm sure much like you know, we have our ideas of what kind of priorities are, but we want to make sure that we don't miss them. So I'm wondering if that kind of mapping with the specific questions in mind would be kind of the best strategy for the next meeting, and kind of keeping those highlighted topics of what needs to be addressed in mind. And then kind of like the logistics of how we would determine that, I think are still in question.
No doubt, Kristen, and thank you for bringing it back to that. We are about out of time, and I wonder, I want to cover at the end our last agenda points, but if I could wrap up this part of the discussion, and Mary Kay, could we host a sub-work group consisting of one member of each constituent state group to start on our mapping before our next meeting? And I'd be happy to be a part of that and assist with staffing. I've got 2 members of my chamber staff on the call, but it seems to me that might be helpful in guiding our discussion next time, if we had just sort of a rough idea of that to go with. And that's just gonna, you know, if we could break down our statutory scheme that way, that might be helpful. Is that possible?
Certainly, yes, sir. Justice Goff, are you thinking that if we were to compile the various, as I described them, lenses that members want to review this through, and kind of have that as the reference for each of these chapters to take a look at and see how those fit into each of those categories? Is that?
That's exactly it. Okay. I think if we, and I want to look at it through the lens of each constituent stakeholder group. Some people might say, don't really care about that one, it doesn't affect me. But somebody might say, wow, that's a pain, and we need to look at this a little bit differently. But I think that if we had that, it would have your map, it would have the questions that you mentioned. And you know, to Kristen's point, that would, I hope, put us in a position where we, you know, we could really have a more structured discussion in the time that we have. Last thing, unless somebody jumps up and down and says absolutely not, I wonder, to Mary Kay's point, if this ends up being a discussion that, you know, it's not going to meet its logical end, but we're going to continue it past December 1st, we are still going to have a report to make. And I wonder if there might be any value in having, I don't mean disparaging, but you ever go to the bookstore when there was bookstores and you saw those books like Computer Programming for Dummies? I mean, I've always thought it would be nice to have just sort of a concise guideline about folks who aren't justice professionals, who are asked to be, you know, part of this process, to have just sort of a historical outline, and then, you know, kind of an outline of what it means to be part of a group like this. So I don't know, does anybody think that that's a bad idea? Okay, maybe that's something we can shoot to include as part of our report. Well, to close us out then, future meetings. So going forward, we're going to have, I'd say, about 5 meetings between now and December 1st is what we think would help. In April, we'll be sending out meeting polls to members to make sure that everyone is available. We're going to have to, you know, keep our meeting length in mind, but I think a 2-hour meeting is probably better than a 1-hour meeting. That's a pretty ambitious task. So what my thought is, unless anybody really objects, that we'd have 5 2-hour meetings. And then we're going to have to really kind of decide how to handle any issues relating to public comments or presentations. And perhaps that's something that we can kind of iron out for next time and make that available so we can present something for discussion. So those are the thoughts. I guess one other thing, if health conditions permit, we would like to have in-person meetings. Now, I like in-person meetings, but at the same time, I really like having folks, like Chris Cunningham on the call. I really like, we've got folks from all over the state that are here participating remotely. So if you've got strong feelings one way or the other against live in-person meetings because you want to participate and you can't, I'd like to know that as well. So please make those thoughts known to April. And with that, is there any further business?
This is Mary Kay.
Yes.
I'm sorry, just a kind of an administrative matter. There is a new amendment to the code surrounding committees that are following the open door laws surrounding remote meetings. Our office is reviewing those changes now. So depending on how we decide to move forward with this group, there may be our decisions with this group may be implicated by the changes in statute, specifically surrounding membership attendance and voting and other administrative matters for open door law meetings.
Thank you for that, Mary Kay. As everyone can understand, there are a lot of things in flux right now because of the sort of the world we currently live in, and we're going to comply with the law. But my goal, as I said, is to really have an open discussion and to get as much collaboration and input as we can from stakeholders. So really appreciate hearing from all of you. And thank you very much. I look forward to conducting this important work with you. And I wish you all a great weekend.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.